Arsenal's Premier League games at the moment just all feel a little bit meh. It's all about the Champions League for Mikel Arteta's side. We're hoping to continue through in that competition off the back of a really positive result in the first leg. When we had to turn our attention back to the Premier League, I'm not sure we did a good enough job of it. Arsenal held to a 1-1 draw at home to Brentford. A frustrating result, a frustrating evening. We'll get into it. We'll break it all down on this episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou, coming to you at 10 a.m. As always. It's our new calling time. We've stuck with it for, half a week, which is good for me. I know people are going to laugh at that, but it's good for me. Anyway, look, we're going to break down yesterday's game against Brentford, a frustrating game in a lot of ways. I kind of made my peace with the whole Premier League thing a while back. We knew that we weren't going to win the league for quite some time. We've known that. We've been, I think, over time, allowed to kind of make peace with that, get used to the idea, etc., etc. And obviously, because of our exploits in the Champions League, because we're up against the mighty Real Madrid. By the way, I keep saying it, but that tie is not over. Because of that, I've kind of been able to place all my eggs in terms of my excitement in that particular basket. And so the Premier League games right now, they do feel a little bit meh, as I said right at the top of the program there. And I'm in this weird place where, like, I came away from yesterday's game feeling quite frustrated, quite annoyed, disappointed. I think there's a lot of things that we got wrong yesterday. But then I keep thinking to myself, well, if we progress against Real Madrid on Wednesday night, I'm not going to care. So it's this weird spot that I'm in where I'm kind of trying to express how I felt watching yesterday's game, express how I feel in the aftermath of the game. But at the same time, I don't want to go overboard because I know that if we go and get the job done in Madrid on Wednesday night, I am not going to care that we drop points against Everton and then we drop points at home to Brentford. And so it's this weird space to be in, isn't it, at the moment? Big good morning to everybody that's joining us in the live chat. Great to see plenty of you with us. Happy Sunday to you all. It was a really gloomy morning here in North London. It's not cold, but I got up this morning and I had all these plans. And, I spent a lot of time yesterday clearing the garden and getting things sorted. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to come outside this morning. I'm going to crack on and I'm going to get on with it. And then I came downstairs and I saw the clouds and the dark and I thought, it's not really going to motivate me much, is it? But you know what? The sunshine's coming out and hopefully the weather is going to get better. Hopefully your day is going to get better because you are tuned into the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me. Anyway, shall we start with the team selection? I think that's a really, really good place to start in terms of our breakdown of yesterday's game. Now, I think in the lead up to the match, there was a lot of talk about rotation, heavy rotation, people constantly, throwing their opinions out there with regards to who should play, who shouldn't play. For me, there were three players that I wanted to wrap up in cotton wool. Three. Those three were William Saliba, Declan Rice, and Bukayo Saka. And two of the three started. Two of the three started. So when the team news came out, there was a part of me, when I heard it, when I heard 5 changes, I thought, okay, 5 changes. That's good. But then when I heard who the changes were, I got to be honest, I was a little bit surprised and a little bit worried. Obviously, in the end, those 3 players that I've mentioned all seem to have come through the game unscathed, but we did lose someone else, or we potentially lost someone else in Thomas Partey. Now, I know there's a lot of back and forth on this right now. I know that Thomas Partey went off because he'd felt something. Mikel Arteta confirmed that in his press conference. But I also know that Thomas Partey stopped in the mix zone and spoke to some reporters and journalists, which, as Tom Canton mentioned on his show this morning, doesn't normally happen in the case that a player is injured. Now, that doesn't mean that he's definitely going to be okay for Real Madrid. But, after his performance on Tuesday, which was quite frankly outstanding, the idea of being without him for such a big game, it worries me and it concerns me. So even if there's a tiny little bit of doubt, I can tell you it is going to keep me kind of treading on eggshells over the course of the next few days, and it's going to have me worried and concerned. Let's get into the team selection then. So Mikel Arteta made those 5 changes, as I said. Raya continued in goal. Partey went in at right back. Saliba and Kivior continued as the central defensive pairing. Kieran Tierney came in at left back to replace Miles Lewis-Skelly. We saw obviously Partey moving into right back, which meant he was no longer in the midfield. So Jorginho came in and Zinchenko replaced Martin Odegaard. In attack, Saka was left out from the start. Ethan Nwaneri played on the right. Gabriel Martinelli continued on the left, and Mikel Merino got a break and a breather. Leandro Trossard came in at centre forward to play in his place. So, look, it's clearly a very changed. I was going to say weakened there, and I kind of hesitated. Look, let's be honest. Let's be frank. It is a weakened Arsenal side. You know, you look at that midfield of Jorginho, Rice, and Zinchenko. I don't think it's got the right balance. Partey at right back, as great as he was yesterday, and we'll come on to his performance in a little bit. He's not a right back. Kieran Tierney is a left back by trade, but certainly doesn't play the role in the way that Mikel Arteta wants it played these days. You know, you look at the attack, Ethan Nwaneri. There's been a bit of a drop off there, hasn't there, in the last few weeks? And again, he's very young, and I'm very conscious of being too harsh on him. But there has been a little bit of a drop off there. And then Leandro Trossard at 9. I mean, I don't think it works a lot of the time. I think it can work in certain circumstances and in certain games. I think when we're playing on the break, when we've got teams that are going to come at us, actually, Leandro Trossard could be quite a handy option in that sort of 9/false 9 role. But in a game like yesterday, we knew we were going to face the low block. That's exactly what we got. And it didn't really work for me. I thought he was really, really ineffective. Remember, Patreons, you will get access to our player ratings, which we record 10 minutes after we finish here on the live full match podcast. So if you want to head over to the Patreon page, you can visit the link in the description, patreon.com/the Chronicles of Aguna. You can sign up and you'll get access to that shortly after we finish up here. We'll bring you player ratings on everybody that was involved for Arsenal. And I've written them down here. We've got the 11 that started, and obviously we've got 5 substitutes, all of whom I think played enough minutes for me to give them a rating. So jam-packed player ratings pod will be available to you patrons very shortly after we conclude here. So listen, that was the team that started the game. And from the very beginning of the game, you felt like we were in control. You felt like it was set, the pattern. I mean, you know, we kind of knew what it was going to be. It was going to be Arsenal having lots of the ball, Arsenal trying to break down a Brentford side that would quite like to, where possible, play on the break. And Mbeumo and Wissa really, really good in that way. Obviously, Kevin Schade was playing as well. He's a very pacey player. He's not someone you want to get involved in too many foot races with. So you felt like they were set up in a way that allowed them to kind of spring out on counter-attacks, and that would kind of be their game plan. That would be their way. Sit deep, sit compact, and try and hit Arsenal on the counter-attack, etc., etc. And that's kind of the way the pattern of the game went. Arsenal thought that they'd score when Kieran Tierney headed in from across from the right-hand side. He was offside, and I sort of called that as soon as I saw it. I think it was a really obvious offside. I mean, I know we've got it now, the semi-automated offsides, but that certainly wasn't one of those where you felt a desperate need for it. It wasn't close. You didn't really need the lines. You could tell by the simple eye test, one replay, bang, offside. I even thought in real time that Kieran Tierney was offside, and that resulted in me with some very kind of muted celebrations. But as the half went on, it was lots of the ball, lots of corners, but not really making a great deal of those. We forced a couple of saves out of Flecken, but nothing really to kind of ride home about. I guess one of the big talking points from the first half was the challenge on Gabriel Martinelli. Arteta was incensed about this. It was a challenge from Christian Norgard on Gabriel Martinelli as he went down the left-hand side for the Gunners. And I've watched the replay multiple times now. In real time, I thought yellow card. like he's accelerating away from you and you've cynically brought him down, yellow card. The more I watch it, the more I don't think that Christian Norgard was trying to chop Gabriel Martinelli. Like the more I watch it, the more I think he was trying to get the ball. Now, the nature of the challenge makes it a dangerous one. But at the same time, if the intention is to get the ball and it's not majorly high, like I didn't think it was massively high. I think the dangerous part about the challenge was the kind of scissor motion that you got from Christian Norgard. But the follow through, the backup leg, if you like, it has to go somewhere. And so it had the potential to do damage to Gabriel Martinelli. And he's very, very fortunate. And we're very, very fortunate that he hasn't picked up an injury off the back of that and that he was okay to continue. But calls for a red card, I'm not sure. I got to be honest. Mikel Arteta was furious. I know a lot of Arsenal fans were furious. And perhaps this is an unpopular opinion in Arsenal spaces. But I think I'm okay with the yellow card just about. Do I acknowledge the danger that Martinelli was put in by that challenge? Yes. But do I think that Christian Norgard went to do him? No, I don't. Do I think that Christian Norgard's intention was to leave one on him? Not really. I think that he's trying to stretch for the ball. I think his follow through's got to go somewhere. And I think the scissor motion that you kind of see there is what makes that challenge look a lot worse than it was intended to be, and is ultimately what makes it worse than it intended to be. But I'm not as incensed by that as a lot of people. And obviously, look, the outcome dictates people's feeling and dictates people's opinion a lot of the time. If the outcome was that Gabriel Martinelli was crunched and had to leave the field of play with a really bad injury off the back of this heavy challenge, I think a heavy challenge is how I would describe it, then of course I'd probably make a bigger deal out of it. But I just think in these circumstances, you can make too much of it. Like I think a lot of the time this season, we've had every right to complain about refereeing decisions and we've had every right to make our feelings and opinions known. And I think if you start, going down the kind of outrage path around things that maybe are questionable, are debatable. Like I think it's debatable whether it's a red card or not. I don't think it's a definite red card. I think and I also don't think it's no way on God's earth a red card. I think there is a debate to be had there. It's a subjective decision. If we start going absolutely bonkers about things like that, then when we do have a real general grievance, our kind of complaints and the impact of them is diluted. And so, like when Lewis Skelly got sent off at Wolves, that was never a red card in a million years. When Trossard got sent off against Manchester City, that was ridiculous on the officials' part. When Declan Rice got sent off, the same thing. When Saliba gave away a penalty at Brighton, that was crazy, stupid decision. Again, there have been so many of them that I would put sort of ahead of the list or ahead of this one if I'm sort of compiling a list of my grievances of the season. Heavy challenge, yes. Potentially dangerous, yes. Any damage done? Thankfully, no. And I think it's probably one that we should move on from. I know that won't be a popular opinion, but that's genuinely how I see it. And it's how I saw it at the time as well. I've had time to watch it back. I've had time to think about it. And I'm still very much of that opinion. Second half begins and you're looking at Arsenal to kind of push on and try and win this game. And obviously, we managed to find our goal through Thomas Partey on 61 minutes, so about 15, 16 minutes into the second period. And it was a really good Arsenal goal, like a really well-worked goal. The cross comes in, Raya comes and claims it, which he's obviously brilliant at doing. And then I think the key to this goal is Raya's distribution, because a lot of goalkeepers, and listen, most goalkeepers at the highest level now are coached to, when they come and claim the ball, to look to distribute it accurately and effectively. In the past, it might have been catch the corner, hold it for a few seconds, allow your team to get up the pitch, and then boot it into a space where your players can duel for it, and you're playing kind of the percentage game. I think over the last few years, we've seen the role of a goalkeeper really evolve, and we've seen their distribution take on more and more significance and more importance in the eyes of the managers and the coaches. And this was a great example of how good David Raya's distribution is, because a lot of goalkeepers would have launched it forward just that split second earlier, probably looking to release Gabriel Martinelli, probably going for that kind of route one ball. And instead, Raya recognizes that that might be too difficult a pass to make, too difficult a bit of distribution to sort of pull off. And instead, he recognizes that Martinelli's dragged the Brentford backline with him and created this huge space in the middle of the park. And when he sees Declan Rice galloping into that area, he releases it nice and early, perfectly weighted, right into the path of Rice, who can just latch onto it with ease and start charging forward. And it's kind of vintage Declan Rice, opens up those long strides, gallops forward brilliantly. And on the far side, you see Thomas Partey sort of making a real charge forward, which isn't really like him. It's not something that we've seen Thomas Partey do a lot. I know he's normally at the base of our midfield, and perhaps the fact that he was playing at right fullback and in a slightly wider area gave him that encouragement and that sort of, showed him that temptation or dangled that temptation in front of his face to say, you know what, get forward. And he does brilliantly. For a long, long time, as Declan Rice is striding forward, I'm convinced he's going to try and pick out Martinelli. And he doesn't. He sort of takes this really neat and tidy touch inside, which then gives you an indication that he's going inside to sort of slightly widen that angle, and so that he can just pop it off to Thomas Partey. And I'll tell you what, that finish from Thomas Partey is pretty damn good, isn't it? Over the top of Flecken, into the back of the net. Arsenal score. It's a wonderful goal. Thomas Partey was outstanding against Real Madrid. And obviously, Declan Rice was the star of the show with the 2 free kicks, and Mikel Merino obviously managed a really, really good goal on that night as well. And it felt like all the talk surrounding that game was around those two. And that maybe outside of Arsenal circles, Thomas Partey hadn't got the credit he deserved for what was a wonderful, wonderful display. So to see him kind of have his moment and score, I really enjoyed it. I did. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was a great goal all round, wonderful move, and the smile on Thomas Partey's face and the atmosphere, the reaction within the stadium, I think was telling of of how much people appreciate Thomas Partey's recent displays and his contribution. And he's playing it right back at times, which isn't ideal. One thing I didn't mention when talking about the lineup, and I should have mentioned, so apologies, we'll just go back to that very, very quickly. There was no Ben White. Now, I'm certain that had Ben White been available, he'd have played. And I'm certain that Thomas Partey would have been one of the players that Mikel Arteta wrapped up in cotton wool. But such was the situation, White out with another sort of injury. Not sure exactly what that is. We were told he felt something in training, which isn't good news. Like, it's natural for players to experience setbacks when they've been out for a long time and they're sort of building themselves back up. It's very, very natural. It's a very, very regular occurrence. But with Ben White, there's been a few of these now. So that's where I'm a little bit concerned. I was a huge advocate of the idea of starting Ben White and Jurriën Timber against Real Madrid and leaving Jakub Kiwior out. It's nothing to do with his quality as a player. Obviously, it's something that Mikel Arteta is worried about with regards to his fitness, because we saw him not start that game when a lot of people would have started him. We saw him miss out yesterday. Mikel then has a decision to make, doesn't he? And it seems like and sounds like it was a bit of a toss-up between Timber and Partey, which one of them could start the game. I think the view was always for them to share the game, but I think it was a bit of a toss-up at the time, who's more fit, who's more likely to be able to get through this. And he's decided Thomas Partey in the end. And, he gets his goal, fantastic stuff. Arsenal 1-0 up. And you feel like we're going to get through. We're going to take all 3 points. We're going to do it having not really exerted ourselves. We're going to do it having rotated and made multiple changes in order to put ourselves in the best possible position ahead of Wednesday. And you're feeling pretty good about everything. But you did get the sense right from the start of the second half that we were a little bit vulnerable to the counterattacks. And where I will criticize Mikel Arteta, and listen, there's a lot of people in the chat, in the live chat, in the comment section among our listeners that, often criticize me and say I'm always reluctant to criticize the boss. It's not something that I ever do. Well, I'm doing it now. So if you want to like bookmark this section, do it. Because I really did think that, look, the team selection from the beginning, I had my thoughts on it. There were certain players I wouldn't have played, certain players I wouldn't have started. I would have done things slightly differently. But I also am willing to acknowledge that I don't have all the information in front of me. Okay, so I don't know how much better Thomas Partey has recovered from the other night versus Jurriën Timber. If Mikel says I had to make that decision for that reason, then you kind of just have to trust him. I think that, you know, Saliba is so critical to our chances of finishing the job in Madrid. I wouldn't have picked him. But then you think about how weak the core of the team becomes if you don't play Saliba and if you don't play Rice, and you can understand why Mikel's picked them. You can understand the want to build momentum. You can understand the want to close the gap on Liverpool. But you can also understand the idea of prioritizing solely the game on Wednesday night against Real Madrid. So listen, there's a lot of debates and conversations that you can be having. There's a lot of back and forth that you can have. But ultimately, I thought where he went wrong, because I'm not going to be too critical about the pre-match stuff, where he went wrong was the in-game management. I thought the in-game management was all over the place. And I thought that that's where we kind of needed to find the balance. We needed to find the balance between doing what was right ahead of Wednesday, but also giving ourselves the best chance of winning the game. Ultimately, it's still a Premier League game. And I don't subscribe to this idea of downing tools. Now, as I said right at the beginning, if we go and do our job in midweek, nobody's going to look back on this with any anger, with any real frustration. People are going to look back on this and say it was what needed to happen in order to give us the best possible chance of progressing. And if we're in the last four of Europe's Premier competition, who's going to give a shit that we dropped a couple of points against Brentford when the title race has been done for months? But in game, I thought Mikel Arteta had a responsibility to manage the game better. We scored on 61 minutes. On 62 minutes, we made a triple change. We brought Kieran Tierney off and replaced him with Miles Lewis-Skelly. We saw Alexander Zinchenko come off and be replaced with Martin Odegaard. And we saw Ethan Nwaneri come off and be replaced by Bukayo Saka. Now, in theory, all of those players that came on are upgrades. All of those players that came on should, in theory, strengthen our team, not weaken it. Lewis-Skelly, you would argue right now, is a better option than Kieran Tierney. Zinchenko is certainly not at Martin Odegaard's level. I know that Odegaard's had a rough season, a tough season, and I've got some thoughts on what he showed yesterday, which you can get in the player ratings Patreon pod, which is coming up shortly after this. Ethan Nwaneri had a really poor game, in my opinion, and so when Bukayo Saka came on to replace him, again, in theory, that was an upgrade. But it's about disrupting the flow and the rhythm of a game that you're in control in, a game that you're on top of, a game that you're in charge of. To make so many changes is a problem. And obviously we had to make a fourth change just 5 minutes after that, 6 minutes after that, where we brought on Jurriën Timber to replace Thomas Partey because he'd felt something and we couldn't afford to take that risk. It's no coincidence that a few minutes later, Brentford go and score a goal. You know, you watch the lead up to that goal, there's a number of issues for me. Where I think you can really kind of hone in on the poor defending was down our left-hand side. You know, we end up in a situation where Brentford have a 2v1 against Leandro Trossard. We allow them to get to the byline. We allow Coyote to stand the ball up at the far post. Again, we've got another opportunity to defend it right. We don't. Then the ball's headed back across the face of the goal. And again, we've got another opportunity to defend it and we don't. So we had 3 opportunities to defend that situation far more effectively and far better than we did. And that's what has really left a bitter taste in my mouth. We made changes that you feel were probably pre-planned changes. We make them, we completely disrupt the flow of the game. We change the balance of our team. We bring players into the game that are cold, when actually I would argue that those that we had on the pitch were good enough to see it through and were playing well enough to see it through. And I know that some of these players that we took off, right? So let's just run through them again. Tierney, Zinchenko, Waneri. You could make the argument that because of a lack of minutes recently, they're not able to complete a game at the moment. But, you know, I would make the point that Zinchenko should be able to get through a 90-minute period or later, get to 75, get to 80. He should be able to get through that. Kieran Tierney hasn't played a lot of football, but if you can't get through 90 minutes in a game where we're relatively comfortable, that rings alarm bells for me. So it was like we were taking off the players that we're not going to use on Wednesday. In which case, why don't you leave them on for longer and not risk upsetting the balance and changing the flow or the direction of a game that we were on top and in charge of? I know Mikel Arteta would argue that the players that he brought on are better, and that in the case of maybe in particular Bukayo Saka, it's important that he gets another 20, 30 minutes in the tank so that he can be at his best when we play Real Madrid on Wednesday. I get all of that, but I just think it wasn't like, if it was the other way around. So let's say that Lewis Skelly started at left back. Let's say that Odegaard started in midfield, that Saka started on the right wing. If we then made those changes to bring Waneri, Zinchenko, and Tierney on, and the game got away from us as a result, I'd look at it and I'd go, do you know what? It did impact us. It did change the direction of the game. It did change the flow of the game. We brought these guys on cold and it cost us. But because we'd have been protecting the ones that we all feel are going to play against Real, I'd have swallowed it and stomached it. But to take off players and change the direction of the game, that I don't care if they're available or not, come Wednesday in a lot of cases, and I'm sure won't play on Wednesday, it felt like we did it the wrong way round. Does that make sense? Like, it was frustrating for me. We did have chances post Brentford's goal to win it. Bukayo Saka had a really good chance. And I've watched it back again this morning. I watched Match of the Day this morning. I still can't believe that he missed that. Long ball forward. Flecken goes to control it. Gets it completely wrong. He's outside of his box. Saka nicks it off him. And all he's got to do is just hit the target with his left foot instantly, first time. But he hesitates. He takes a couple of touches. The door completely closes on him. That was a big chance. He also curled one wide. And he did have a couple of good moments as the game sort of rolled on into the, the sort of latter stages. I mean, he had chances. We had chances. In the end, we didn't do enough to win it. Frustrating. Just back on, I know I'm jumping about a little bit today, but just back on the Brentford goal. I thought David Raya could have done more. I thought that his positioning for the initial cross into the box from Coyote was weird. He seemed to be like placed rather than in a kind of central area or slightly more towards his near post. He seemed to be positioned way too close to the crosser to be able to recover if the ball was dinked over him. The ball then goes to the far side. It's headed back across. And I just feel like he's off balance, Raya, as Wissa shoots, because it's a really strange attempt to try and save it. He sort of just flings an arm out, but he's off the ground and he's all... I don't know, like, it just didn't look comfortable to me. Like, just watch it back and let me know what you think. I felt that David Raya had a small part to play in that goal as well. Obviously, the defending at the far post isn't good enough. Obviously, the 2v1 that Brentford create down there, right, our left against Trossard is not good enough. Lots of issues there. But I think Raya's role in that has to be highlighted as well. We'll touch on a couple of other bits. Then of course, we'll take some of your questions from the live chat. Remember, we got player ratings to come on Patreon very shortly after as well. I do want to talk about that Partey potential injury. Because if Thomas Partey is now a doubt going into Wednesday night, and there was a lot of people that say that he's fine. D9097 says, why are all you Arsenal channels scaremongering for views? All I see is Partey is injured everywhere. If you watch that game, you'd know he's not. Well, the manager literally said he is. And so it's not people fabricating a headline or a story. Like, Mikel Arteta has literally said that he picked up an injury. It might just be a knock. Fingers crossed it is just a knock. And fingers crossed he's available. But I think Arsenal fans are well within their rights to be concerned by that, given how important and how crucial he was in what we managed in midweek. Barney Bernardo says, our manager lies. Well, then let's never listen to another press conference or interview ever again. We might as well just switch him off and not bother with him. Barney says, I bet he plays Wednesday. Yeah, I think the chances of him playing are greater than the chances of him not playing. But it's always a worry when a player feels something ahead of a really big game and the team, the club, the manager, the staff take the decision to take him off, as we've done. So, yeah, look, I bet he plays. I hope he plays. Barney says, I bet he plays. I hope he plays. I do. But my point was going to be, before I got distracted by some of the comments, my point was going to be, there's not really that much Mikel could have done. Like, it was always going to be the case that if anyone we deemed crucial picked up an injury in this game against Brentford, we were going to literally lose our shit, right? But what more could he have done? As I say, I think the intention was to give him a breather. I think the intention was to leave him out. I think the intention was to wrap him up in cotton wool. But then you lose Ben White ahead of the game. Jurriën Timber's not deemed fit enough to start. And all of a sudden, you're short of options. You haven't got another option. And so my point here is that, let's say worst case scenario, and I hope it's not the case, but let's say that Thomas Partey is unavailable to start against Real Madrid now. I know there'll be a lot of revisionism. I know there'll be a lot of people out there that go, well, he should never have played him against Brentford. He should never have played him at right back, blah, blah, blah. What else could he have done under yesterday's circumstances? I mean, I look at the substitutes bench. Timber was the only other potential right back option. Nathan Butler-Oyedeji was on the bench. He's a winger. Jack Henry Francis was on the bench. He's a deep lying midfield player. Lewis Skelly, I think, needed a breather. Mikel Merino is not a right fullback. Neto's a goalkeeper. Saka's a right winger. Sterling's a winger. Timber was the only one. Odegaard was on the bench as well. Timber was the only one that you could have looked at and gone, okay, you know what? He could play. But if there was more concern over his fitness than the fitness of Thomas Partey, and we're worried about Ben White now, and let's not forget, Jurriën Timber's been fantastic at right back for us and was immense again against Real Madrid the other night. This was the only call that Mikel could realistically make. So regardless of what the situation is with Thomas Partey and whether he makes it or not, I'm not going to have any gripe with Mikel Arteta because I don't know what else he could have done. What else did I want to say? I think there was one more point I wanted to make before we take your questions. Start getting the questions in the live chat and we'll work our way through a few of those before we wrap up. My big disappointment with the last couple of Premier League games. Look, I know the title's over. It's been over for ages. Made my peace with that to a degree. But my point here is there is this feeling of, yes, I know we've had injuries. Yes, I know we've had other problems. I know that things have at times gone against us and it's really kind of set us back in a lot of ways. There is a part of me that's annoyed that we haven't made Liverpool fight for it. Like, this is a procession now for Liverpool. A procession to the Premier League title. They need 3 more wins. They need 9 more points. And they're champions. I'm not worried necessarily about us holding on to second place because I think we will. I think we've got a good enough lead there. And I think we will pick up enough points between now and the end of the campaign to ensure that we hold on to second. But, we've allowed them to essentially walk to the title without any real challenge. The last few months have been really, really easy for Liverpool. We've dropped points. They've dropped points. Our overall form in the Premier League is just nowhere near what it needs to be if you want to challenge for a Premier League title. And we know that better than anybody else because you look at the back end of last season where in the second half of the campaign, we were almost flawless and we still didn't win it. You look at now and the fact that we've won just 2 of our last 7 Premier League games, it is frustrating. It is a drop-off. There's been a lot of talk about regression. I know Gary Neville's gone on TV and spoken about that. I think that those comments fail to acknowledge all of the context, and I think that means that particular bit of analysis is flawed. Have we regressed in terms of our league form? Yes, but I think there are explainables for that. And I also think as well that, how stupid are people going to look when they talk about regression if Arsenal go and win the Champions League? If Arsenal go and achieve something under Mikel Arteta that the club in its rich history has never managed before. The club's only ever been to one UEFA Champions League final. That was back in 2006 under the great Arsene Wenger. If they were to get there again under Mikel Arteta, that would be a huge achievement. And so the regression talk would be stupid. I understand that it's being spoken of in the context of the Premier League and points tally last season versus points tally this season, etc., etc. But that would be, again, failing to take into context all of the things that have happened and why we are where we are. Let's get some of your questions and thoughts in just a second. I just wanted to make that final point. We will take a really, really short pause. When we come back, we will get into your questions and your thoughts from the chat box. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner. Like and subscribe.
That's right. Like and subscribe to the Chronicles of a Gooner. Let's go into the live chat box. Imran Aleem says, I knew this type of question was coming. Should Arteta be removed if he doesn't get past Real Madrid on Wednesday? No. I would never advocate for sacking a manager based on one result. And up until now, where we are today, I don't feel like Mikel Arteta should be sacked. So if he was sacked after we lose to Real Madrid, if that happens, then that would be me calling for his head on the basis of one game. And I don't think that that's ever the right way to approach these things. Ultimately, we are 3-0 up. And the expectation is that we progress, partly and largely because of Mikel Arteta. So your question fails to take that into consideration. You could talk about the free kicks. You could talk about Mikel Merino's goal, all of that stuff. You could talk about the individual player performances, all fantastic on the night. Yes, for sure. But Mikel Arteta tactically set us up brilliantly. Brilliantly. I did a YouTube short. If you're a YouTube viewer, it's also on my TikTok and on my Instagram, where I very, very briefly broke down how we approached the Real Madrid game from a tactical perspective and how that saw us get the upper hand over them. We did a more in-depth analysis on that during the post-match pod, which you can go back and check out on the channel or on the audio feed, whichever way you prefer to take it in. So my point here is that I believe Mikel Arteta's role in that 3-0 win was huge. And so if I'm saying that he should be sacked if we don't get past Real Madrid on Wednesday, that would literally be me calling for someone's head on the basis of one result, something I said I wouldn't do. Real Madrid are a freaking good side. They are serial European champions. They have got Kylian Mbappe, Vinny Jr., Jude Bellingham, Rodrigo, all in attack. They are more than capable of scoring goals against us. So, A, don't get complacent. And this question, while it's framed around Mikel Arteta, does come from a place of complacency, because I assume that by asking that question, you believe that it's done and dusted, that we're pretty much there. And so you're suggesting that if we failed to get through, it would be the capitulation of all capitulations. And yeah, do you get what I'm saying? Do you get where I'm coming from? I don't feel that this is a particularly valid question at the moment. I don't. Obviously, opinions change. Everybody has their breaking point with certain things and certain managers, certain players. Maybe for a lot of people, this would be it if we were to collapse in Madrid. But I'm not going to go from saying I wouldn't sack someone based on one result to saying, well, if he doesn't get the result we need in Madrid, then he should be gone. I'm not going to be that knee-jerk. Ave says, do you think we will sit back at Madrid? And in your opinion, what's the best way in going about the game? We're going to do a preview show where I'll break it down tactically and have a look at what happened last week and try and take some learns and some lessons from that. And, maybe we can help that to kind of, put together our plan for the second leg. I think there's got to be balance. I think balance is my key word here. I think, yes, you want to Make sure that you're defensively sound and that you don't take stupid risks. But I also think you don't want to sink too deep, because if you do, you invite pressure. And against the world's best players, you don't want to be doing that. I think we need to have an outlet. We need to be able to get out. We need to carry a threat of our own. Because listen, if we score the first goal, it's done. If we score the first goal, that's humongous. So there's got to be a willingness to attack, but there's also got to be a balance and an air of caution when it comes to overcommitting bodies when we don't really need to. So it's all about that balance, but we'll do a breakdown of that in a little bit more detail when it comes to the preview show, which will be with you guys early next week. DJ Wells says, Harry, you might need to do a panorama-style documentary about all the decisions and VAR controversy we've suffered over the last 2 seasons. You need all the time in the world to put something like that together. And I just don't have it, or the kind of mental capacity to kind of relive some of those moments and explain them. What have we got in the chat? What? There's a silly comment from Moses suggesting that there's some racism in the way that we judge certain players. Come on, man. Jid says Arsenal are unbeaten in the last 19 matches that Kivior started in all competitions. But you'll hear some pretend all 19 games were against weak teams. Or that Arteta instructed the whole team to protect him. Jid's still going with that Jakob Kivior thing. Listen, he was decent yesterday. He was very good against Real Madrid for the most part. And he was good at Everton last weekend. I'll give him his flowers, but you don't need to keep peddling the Jakob Kivior thing. Like, people have an opinion of Jakob Kivior based on what they've seen of him so far. It's not something that people have just plucked out of the air or made up. It's an opinion based on the eye test. And you obviously disagree with that opinion, which is fine. But I can't believe that a week later we're still having this debate. Richie says, Harry, are you going to Madrid for work or pleasure? I am going to Madrid. I'm going on Tuesday afternoon. And we're going to bring you some Chronicles of Aguna content from the Spanish capital, which I really can't wait to do. Am I going for work or pleasure? I'm covering the game, so I am working. It's going to be fun, but I'm also going to do my utmost to spend some time catching up with some friends that are also making a trip, taking in the whole away day atmosphere type thing, which is just fantastic. Work, yes. Can I sneak a bit of pleasure in there? I'm sure I will. John P says, to be fair, to be second with 28 injuries throughout the season, wrong red cards and pens given against us, I feel they've done about as well as possible. But holding on to second is important to me. Me too. It's really important to me. But I'm not at that point yet where I'm panicking about it. It's kind of why I said I think we do enough. I think if we continue to drop points over the coming weeks, then all of a sudden we've got to start looking over our shoulders and maybe things feel a little bit different. But I am confident that we finish second, and anything less than second will be a disappointment for me. I'm kind of okay with being second because of all the factors that you've mentioned. I'm not celebrating it before someone suggests that, but I'm kind of content with it given the circumstances. However, if we fell off and finished third or fourth, that wouldn't be good enough, and that would be a regression for sure. What have we got in the live chat? Lots of people asking if Thomas Partey is injured. Let me just very quickly update you guys that are joining us a little bit later on. So Thomas Partey was taken off yesterday on 69 minutes, replaced with Julian Timber. Mikel Arteta, after the game, said that he felt something and that they didn't want to take any risks. He did use the word injured, Mikel Arteta, which suggests that there's a problem. I don't believe that he's trying to play mind games with Carlo Ancelotti. Do you? I think they obviously were concerned and were worried whether he'll be available on Wednesday. I think he probably will be. That's kind of my gut feel. He was doing interviews in the mix zone after the game as well, which is normally a good sign, but you just don't know. Jason says, will you be coming to Singapore? No, I won't, my friend. I did think about preseason tours this year, but obviously some things in my personal life have made that maybe a little bit less likely. Listen, I spent over a month away last summer at the European Championships. I missed my kids dearly. I missed the wife as well, but don't tell her. I was away for a long, long time, and I did sort of look at this summer and think, right, this is a good opportunity to kind of do some stuff with the families, to take some time, to maybe go away, whatever. That was all in the pipeline. That was all in the plan. But obviously, as I sort of told you guys a little while ago, we were expecting a third child towards the end of the summer. So that makes my appetite to kind of want to go away, far away for a long period of time less. I want to be here. Do you know what I mean? I want to be around. So the likelihood of me going to Singapore is very unlikely, maybe even at zero at this moment in time. I know that we've got a couple of games over in the Far East, which I think is great. I think it's good to mix it up a little bit. Obviously, we've been going to the US for a few years now. I think it's nice that we're doing something a little bit different. And it gives our fans in that part of the world the opportunity to go to some Arsenal games, to take it all in. So I personally won't. I say won't. I mean, if I get a gig to do it, that might change. But right now, my plan is not to come. Maybe next year, depending on where it is. Let's see what else we've got. Theo P. And this question is a good one because it prompts another point that I missed when working through the podcast. I've had a shocker today. Teach me for doing them on Sunday mornings. Theo says, hello, Harry. Would you agree with me if I said, would you rather buy 7 or 8 players to cover several positions instead of spending 100 million on one centre forward? This coming from the fact that we played with 10 at the end. Mikel Arteta made all 5 changes. And when Jorginho picked up what looks like a rib injury, we had to go down to 10 men. Now, it was only for a few minutes, but that's not ideal. And whenever that happens, I always think a manager is kind of left with a bit of egg on their face. I think we're in a place now where it's not about buying volume. It's about buying quality. And I think that I would rather see us spend 150 million across the summer on 2 or 3 positions that we need, rather than trying to build the squad in terms of, volume of players again. I think we've been really unlucky with injuries and the volume of injuries that we've had this season. And so under normal circumstances, our size squad, it's probably not ideal, but it certainly doesn't get exposed as much as it has this season. So that's my take on that. But yeah, I talked about in-game management a little bit earlier, didn't I? And I talked about Mikel Arteta maybe getting that slightly wrong on the day. And I think that was another example of that, going down to 10. Richie says, very jealous, Harry. I love Madrid. I've never been to Madrid. So if anybody's got any suggestions or recommendations, let me know in the chat for sure. Okay, question from Jasper, who says, is rotation a good idea when we potentially have a race for the Champions League spots on our hands? Well, it's interesting because I think ideally you don't want to rotate too much. But I think because we've had these 2 ties against Real Madrid, we're going to have a gap, I'd imagine, between if we do get through the quarterfinals and we go into the semis, I think we're probably going to have some Premier League games around there where we don't have a massive game 2-3 days later, in which case there's going to be less of a need to rotate. I think we just accepted that we're not going to win the Premier League, that we're not even going to close the gap on Liverpool significantly. And we kind of just took a decision to prioritize. And, it can blow up in your face. I remember when Unai Emery was in charge and he opted to prioritize the Europa League over the Premier League. We dropped points in successive games against Brighton and Crystal Palace at home. And then we lost the Europa League final, having missed out on the top 4 by a point. And I remember at the time thinking he gambled on the Europa League. He wanted that. That's what he went after. He never really seeked to find the balance between the two. He gambled solely on the Europa League. And ultimately, in the end, he was left with egg on his face and it cost us Champions League qualification. And had we made the Champions League, maybe things for Unai Emery at Arsenal would have been very, very different. Maybe he would have got a chance. Maybe he would have got given more time, more funds, etc., etc. I think Mikel Arteta is in a position where, and I say this because he still plays Saliba, he still plays Rice, still gives Saka minutes despite him coming back from an injury. I feel like Mikel's in a place where he's not completely gone one way or the other. he's trying to spread his chips across both competitions as much as is necessary. So he's going to prioritize the Champions League, yes, but he's also going to make sure that he leaves enough on the pitch to pick up enough points in what remains of our Premier League campaign to ensure that we finish second. Now, there's no guarantee that that happens, but I think that's his way of looking at it. I don't think he's gone, it's Champions League and screw the league, I don't care. I think he's gone, right, it's Champions League, which is my priority, but I still need to make sure that I leave enough on the pitch to pick up adequate points in the Premier League to ensure that we finish second. Because if we finish second 8 points behind Liverpool, or if we finish second 12 points behind Liverpool, who cares? If it means we've got the potential to go a round further in the Champions League, who really cares? But he needs to consolidate that second position. He does. Thank you, Richie, for your recommendation. I'll definitely check that out. Okay, let's Rumble's back. Rumble, we haven't seen you. Rumble is one of the bigger critics of Mikel Arteta in our live chat. And let me just say, for the record, for those of you listening, it's great to see you, mate, because I did wonder where you'd got to in all the joy, reaction, aftermath to the Real Madrid spanking last week. You were nowhere to be seen. Arsenal drop a couple of points and Rumble's here. Rumble is here. Fantastic. Andrew says, Harry, I have to sit with the Madrid fans on Wednesday. Long story. How am I going to keep my cool? Look, first of all, I don't think you'll be alone. I've heard of a fair few Arsenal fans that have managed to get tickets in the home end. Keep your head down as much as you possibly can is what I would say. But like, I don't think you'll be alone. And yeah, you just got to get through it, mate. Obviously it's not the ideal situation, but if you get to witness a historic night in the flesh, then you'll take that every day, right? Rumble says, is the tie over, Harry? No, it's not. I've never said it's over. In fact, I think at the beginning of the reaction pod that we done, when everybody else was jumping up and down and ecstatic, my first words on that pod were, this is not over. So I don't think it's over for a second, but I just think it's funny that you're really kind of vocal and have lots to say when Arsenal slip up, but you refuse to give them any credit for what was an outstanding performance and result against Real Madrid the other day. We know that the tie's not over. Anybody that's ever watched Real Madrid do their thing in the Champions League knows that the tie is not over. You're allowed to enjoy what we did on Tuesday night. You're allowed to have enjoyed that display, to have lapped it up, to have taken it in without thinking that the tie is over. The two opinions can coexist. Be happy, be pleased with what we saw, enjoy it, but it doesn't mean that you're arrogant and you're complacent. You're doing that thing that those dividers like to do, which is try and split people. Try and make people feel as though they have to be in one camp or the other when actually you can be in two. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all so much for joining me on this episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. If you haven't done so already, guys, can you please leave a like on the video? It really does help. For our YouTube viewers, that would be massive. Also, subscribe to the channel as well if you haven't done so already as we continue on our journey. If you're listening on audio, whether that's Apple or Spotify, leave us a review. That stuff really does help. Guys, there's only 53 likes on the board. There's no reason we shouldn't have at least 100 by the time I hit the end stream button. Come on. It really does help. It means the world to me. Please do so. Also, we're going to be bringing you some player ratings off the back of that 1-1 draw against Brentford. If you want to check those out, go over to our Patreon page and sign up. Patreon.com/The Chronicles of a Gooner. The link is in the description. Just pop down, give it a click, check it out, come over. We'll bring you some player ratings, I should say. That'll be with you in around about 15 to 20 minutes once I've concluded recording it. I'll see you all on the next one. Until then, take care of yourselves and have a wonderful Sunday with your loved ones. Goodbye.